For this exhibition, conservators and conservation scientists conducted a technical study of Braque's paintings, focusing on works dated between 1928 and 1944. The goal of the study was to learn more about Braque's approach through direct examination of his artwork. We asked, what materials did Braque use? How did he use his materials? And what significance did this have for understanding his work? Many techniques used to study artworks exploit different types of electromagnetic radiation, such as ultraviolet, infrared, and X-rays. Visible light, the rainbow of colors visible to the human eye, is part of the electromagnetic spectrum and is one of our most important tools in the examination of paintings. In a technical study, we begin most examinations with a careful inspection in good overall lighting to get a general sense of the artwork. As we alter the direction of the light, we begin to highlight certain features of the painting. For instance, Raking Light. On the round table, strong lighting from the left grazing the surface reveals the paint has an overall texture similar to a stucco or fresco wall. A closer look reveals this texture is purely in the ground layer of the painting. Chemical analysis determined that the ground layer is lead-white pigment and oil, bulked with colorless particles of calcite, dolomite, and kaolin clay. Powdered quartz was also found and gives the paint a fine, gritty texture. In addition, Braque mixed particles of sand and small gravel into the paint. Braque's method of applying the ground to the canvas also contributed to the unique surface of the picture. He spread the paint thinly, using a large palette knife and a stiff brush. Up close we see fine texture left by the brush, along with troughs and grooves where particles of sand and gravel were dragged through the paint. In some places, Braque sprinkled more sand, using the brush to lightly tamp the grains into the paint surface. Ultraviolet light, or UV, is just outside the visible range on the electromagnetic spectrum and invisible to the human eye. When examined in UV, some materials give off a visible fluorescence. Materials such as natural resin varnishes, certain adhesives, and some pigments fluoresce with characteristic color and intensity. Looking at artworks in a dark room under UV can determine if these materials are present. To properly see the characteristic fluorescence, we need to filter out blue visible light that is present in many UV light sources. Looking at the round table under filtered UV, there is no uniform overall fluorescence to indicate that the picture is varnished. The dull glow in the background is from lead-white pigment in the ground layer. Zero fluorescence in the green paint in the center near the top suggests the use of a copper-containing pigment. In the upper right, greenish fluorescence of yellow paint is characteristic of a zinc-containing pigment. In normal light, the paint surface of the washstand appears matte and uniform. Some texture from sand in the ground layer is also noticeable. Here we see the washstand in specular light, a form of raking light viewed from an angle. Specular light emphasizes surface characteristics such as matte and shiny areas, as well as paint texture and topography. In the washstand, specular light reveals that the paint layers are thin and sand particles are evenly and sparsely distributed throughout the black ground. It also shows the variety of surface finish in this picture. For instance, near the lower left and upper right, the light is completely absorbed by areas of highly matte black paint. Here, Braque probably used blotters to absorb excess oil from his paint before applying it to the canvas, resulting in the rich, velvety surface. Specular light also highlights matte and glossy areas in the stool of the washstand, the oblong shape near the bottom of the picture. The outline of the stool is defined by matte olive green paint, while translucent, slightly glossy light green fills the interior of the shape. Analysis found that Braque mixed both varnish and beeswax into this lighter green paint to give it its satin gloss finish. The stereo-microscope allows for a closer look at the paint surface. With up to 25 times magnification, it reveals characteristics not visible to the naked eye. Examination through the microscope gives a sense of the paint's consistency and cohesiveness, and the relative sizes of the pigment particles. Here we're looking at the black ground at about 10 times magnification. The ground is very thinly applied, and through the microscope we can see that it is matte and porous with tiny pinpoint voids throughout. These observations suggest that the paint layer is probably fairly absorbent. Analysis of paint samples determined that the black pigment in the ground is lamp black, a carbon pigment derived from soot. The paint also contains some iron oxide pigments and kaolin clay, a colorless filler, which would account for the matte, absorbent surface that we see under magnification. Now we're looking at an orange area in the background. Streaks in the paint suggest Braque mixed red, probably vermilion, wet into wet with yellow or white to get the orange color. The larger lumps we see are particles of sand coated with paint. The sand was mixed with the black paint of the ground before it was applied to the canvas, so that it was fully incorporated within this layer. Under magnification, we can clearly see the orange paint is on top of the black paint. In this close-up, we see tiny cracks in the paint. One explanation for cracks of this type is that some of the oil binder in the paint was leached out by the absorbent ground layer, causing cracks to form in the now slightly underbound paint as it dried. Now we're looking at the gray paint from the picture, and we see the paint has a gritty appearance, with larger white pigment particles throughout. We also see tiny cracks similar to those seen in the orange paint, but still the paint appears cohesive and in good condition. When light is transmitted through the canvas, it can reveal the thickness of paint layers and sometimes artist changes. As the light is shined through the back of lemons and napkin ring, we can see how thin the yellow paint of the lemons is, and that the paint is a little thicker near the right edge of the plate. In the area of the picture, transmitted light highlights the artist's brushstrokes, giving us a sense of how quickly and assuredly he applied the paint. The near-infrared region of the electromagnetic spectrum lies adjacent to the red of visible light. Under infrared, many pigments are transparent or semi-transparent, while others reflect or absorb the energy to appear white or black in an infrared image. Cameras sensitive to infrared light allow us to see beneath the surface of a painting to detect preliminary drawings or changes made in the paint layers. This is a digital video camera with a special sensor that is sensitive to infrared wavelengths. Examination in infrared highlighted Braque's pencil and charcoal preliminary drawing in lemons and napkin ring. As the paint layers become transparent in infrared, charcoal and fine pencil lines defining the contours of the tablecloth and the lemons are emphasized. Sketchy lines around the napkin indicate some indecision on Braque's part about the size and placement of this form during the early stages of the painting. In X-radiography or X-ray imaging, low-energy X-rays record the relative densities of paint materials. Like infrared imaging, X-radiography can reveal changes at different stages of a painting's development. X-rays pass easily through less dense areas and appear dark on an X-radiograph. Thicker areas of greater density appear white. X-radiography of still life with palette revealed a different still life composition almost completely obscured beneath the current painting. An egg and dart pattern decorates the table edge along the bottom. A pipe and oblong dish can be seen in the left half of the composition. And a group of circles at the right suggests a bunch of grapes. High-density lead-white paint used for the background of the later still life accounts for the lack of details around the edges of the X-radiograph. In the final picture, subtle evidence of the underlying painting remains in circles of green paint, left partly visible in the center of the palette just below the brushes. These are some of the grapes that are seen in the right-hand side of the X-radiograph. X-ray fluorescence spectrometry, or XRF, is a recent advance in X-ray technology. XRF aids in the identification of paint materials, specifically pigments, without the need to take a paint sample. In our study, XRF analysis of 8 paintings provided a general impression of Braque's color choices and the evolution of his palette over the period of the study. In XRF, a focused X-ray beam excites a characteristic fluorescence in an area on the artwork no larger than 5 millimeters. The invisible fluorescence is measured by a detector, and software generates a chart where peaks represent specific chemical elements present in the sample. Pigments are identified based on the elements detected, the colors of the area examined, and what is already known about the artwork. Using XRF, we found that Braque's palette remained generally consistent between 1928 and 1945, with most pictures containing neutral umber and iron oxide pigments, bone black, carbon black, lead white, and zinc white, along with bright colors like vermilion and emerald green.